Short horror story. Alone in the house. It was pitch black outside. The moon stayed hidden behind some storm clouds that floated menacingly above. Rain had been promised earlier that evening, but had not yet arrived. She didn't hate living there, but ever since she'd separated from her husband, this was the only place she could afford. It was in the middle of nowhere, away from all the things which she enjoyed, like shopping, going to the cinema, normal things which everyone did. Her name was Verity, and the last few months had been hard. Leaving him was the best thing she'd ever done. Verity now felt at peace for the first time in ages. She drank the last of the tea. Putting the mug down onto the worktop, she thought she saw something out of the window. What could that be? Verity neared the glass. The outside light was on, which lit up only a small area of the back garden. From behind a hedge a cat came into view. It peered at her before running out of sight, a mouse caught in between its teeth. Thank God for that, she thought. The last thing she needed in the dead of night was her abusive husband turning up out of the blue. She had an odd feeling in the pit of her stomach, like something wasn't right. She headed to the living room, then sat down. The 10 o'clock news was just about to start. Halfway through the program, something was heard smashing in the kitchen. What the hell was that? Her heart raced. Cautiously, she proceeded back to that room to check it out. She looked through the doorway and saw the mug laying on the floor in pieces. How could that have happened? Verity noticed something which sent a shudder through her. The window just above the sink had been opened. Is anybody there? She asked. The cat from earlier appeared from behind the washing machine and ran to her feet. Out of sheer relief, she laughed. Talk about overreacting. Verity closed the window and opened the back door, then ushered the cat out of the house. The animal seemed disappointed by this. But she didn't care, she'd had enough for one day. I'm sorry, cat. I've had a tough day at the office, she said. All I want to do now is relax and head to bed in about half an hour. My God, I'm so pathetically lonely I'm having a conversation with a cat. The animal ran off, ignoring her. She closed the door. She turned the kitchen light off and headed back to the comfort of the sofa. The news had ended. The TV now switched off. It was time to go to bed. She yawned, stretching her arms. She turned the lamp off and headed to the bottom of the stairs. Verity felt tired, which was a good thing. She slowly walked up while brushing a hand through her long blonde hair. She'd had a bath earlier and could still smell the shampoo. It smelt nice. Night house, she whispered. No one answered. At the top she proceeded down the little hallway to her bedroom. She couldn't wait to get into bed, as it was warm and comfortable. Once at the door she pushed it open and flicked the ceiling light on. A short time later, Verity was fast asleep. She awoke with a start, and heard a noise from downstairs. She neared the entrance fearfully, and poked her head out, looking towards the stairs and waiting patiently just to see if she heard it again. She didn't know if it was her imagination playing tricks on her, but the faint sound of footsteps walking not too far away sent alarm bells in her mind. Was someone in the house? Please, God, no. A door was heard slamming. Please leave me be, she quietly said, scared beyond belief. A man's voice said from the bottom of the stairs, Is anybody there? She put a hand to her mouth. She closed her eyes. She was too petrified to look. Verity was so sure it was her husband, she stayed where she was. Reaching for the switch, she turned the light off, so she was now in darkness. With utter shock, Verity heard someone walking up the stairs. My God, please don't let it be Brian. Why was he here? Verity could now hear this person in the hallway. The door inches from her opened. She shielded her face and shouted, Just leave me alone, Brian. Who's Brian? Asked a voice. She glanced up and a policeman stood there with a worried look on his face. Sorry about earlier, she said, looking at him embarrassed. The officer in his late 50s laughed, and replied, Well, if I knew about the problems you've had with your husband. I'm not surprised you're scared. Verity sat down so she faced him. A door was open, you said earlier. How could that be? I closed everything. The officer, while taking his hat off and rubbing a hand through his thinning hair, said, "That's why I came in. As I drove down the road, I saw your front door open and found this very peculiar." Verity didn't like the sound of that at all. "Do you think it's Brian playing tricks on me?" The policeman rubbed both his hands together with an uneasy expression on his face, and answered, "I don't know. I'm not sure if I should leave you, just in case." She could tell he would rather go. It was something in his eyes. "I'll be okay," she said, slight desperation in her voice. The officer seemed uneasy by this. "Look, I've got rounds to do, but I'll pop back later just to check on you. Before I came in earlier, I looked through the garden and couldn't see anything suspicious. Here's my number. Take it. If you have any concerns, ring this immediately." He handed her a card. She put it in her trouser pocket. Verity got up from the chair and showed him to the front entrance. "Trust me, I'll be okay." He gave her a smile. "I'll pop back later to check around. So if you hear something, it's probably me. Or I meant to say, it will definitely be me." He laughed, feeling stupid. "Thank you," was all she said. "What's your name, by the way?" "It's Kevin," he answered. "I promise, I'll come back later." She watched him walk to the police car, which was parked along the road, then closed the door to the outside world. Maybe it was her, who had forgotten to close the window in the kitchen and the front door. It seemed unlikely, but lately her concentration wasn't as good as it should be. Verity felt the soft pillow against the back of her head. After a long day, she was happy to be back in her bed. Before long, she was sound asleep. Verity awoke suddenly. She rubbed her eyes, then peered at the clock. It was 4:36 a.m. A bang from outside made her fearful. Maybe it was the policeman? Even though it was chilly in the room, Verity ran to the window and peered out. It was difficult to see much from where she stood. Verity put on her dressing gown and hurried out of the bedroom to the room opposite, as it faced the road in front. The moment she saw the parked police car, relief ran through her. She went downstairs to make him a nice warm drink. At the bottom of the stairs, she walked to the front door and opened it. The car was thankfully still there. Verity went to look for him. He couldn't be that far away. With her arms wrapped around her to keep her warm, the woman walked around the house to where the back garden was. Still there was no sign of him. "I can make you a warm drink if you like," she said, raising her voice a little. "I'm having trouble sleeping, you see, and the company would be nice." She made her way further into the garden, keeping her eyes peeled. She then saw someone a few meters away. It looked like a figure bending down close to where the shed was. Verity headed down the little path. Suddenly a torchlight came on from behind her, and shone on the most dreadful sight. 2 meters from her was the policeman. His head was missing and his hands had been nailed into the side of the shed. Verity screamed. Laughter was heard from somewhere. She turned around to see who it was. In front of the woman stood a person wearing a horrible mask, the torch held in his right hand. He then said, "Verity, Verity, where could we be? My knife will cut your head off, and in time you'll see that you're the only one for me." She placed a hand over her mouth, then took 2 steps back to escape this maniac. Suddenly she fell over the dead policeman. She got up. The person had vanished. "What the hell is going on?" she shrieked. Instinctively, she ran back to the house. Once inside, she slammed the door shut. The phone sat on a nearby shelf. She needed to ring the police. Dialing 999, she was aware of someone standing behind her. She faced him. He still wore that grotesque mask. "Why are you doing this, Brian?" she asked. She wanted to cry. "Brian? Who the hell is Brian?" he replied. Verity put the receiver to her ear. A voice was heard from the other end. "How can I help you?" It was a man's voice. Verity stared at the person in front, and down the phone she whispered, "I need the police immediately. I have a stranger in my house. I live at..." The line suddenly went dead. She dropped the phone to the floor. "What do you want from me?" she shouted, terrified. He took a step towards her. He swung his arms about like he was dancing, then answered, "I want your blood on my clothes. Do you like the sound of that?" She had had enough of this psycho. Verity ran down the hall. She heard him howling like a wolf. She entered the kitchen and swiftly shut the door. Verity searched for a knife from one of the drawers, then hid it behind her back. She waited for him to show his face. A door slammed from somewhere nearby. She wasn't taking any chances. "What do you want from me?" she yelled. "I swear I'll kill you if you come near me again." The door burst open and the man ran towards her with a sadistic grin on his face. She lost her balance and fell to the floor. He stood over her, a sparkle in his eyes. He took his mask off. "Why give up? Brian would be ashamed of you for acting like this," he said. "I hate Brian, and I fucking hate you," she shouted. He bent down to her, enjoying every moment. She rammed the knife hard into his chest. He let out a scream as he fell on top of her. She pushed him away and pulled the knife out of his body. Shaken, Verity stood up, putting the weapon onto a nearby worktop, not quite believing everything that had happened. The bastard by her feet was slowly bleeding to death. There was a terrified look on his face as the blood ran through his fingers to the floor below. "So who the hell are you?" she asked. He didn't answer. Seconds later, he was dead. Verity had had enough. "Well done, girl, I knew you could do it," said a voice on the left of her, while he clapped. "My God, it's you," she thought, with sheer horror. Slowly, she turned to face Brian. He had a smile. His shirt was covered in blood. "Why?" she asked. Brian stayed where he was. A serious look came across his face, before he replied, "Because you can't live without me, sweetheart. I've missed you." Verity felt sick to the stomach. "Why did you kill the policeman?" "I could tell he fancied you, dirty bastard." Smashing his head in, felt fantastic, he said, shrugging his shoulders like he didn't care. "Let's have a fresh start. What do you think of that, Verity?" Taking a step closer, Brian held a small red box in his right hand. "What's that?" she asked, fearful. Brian smirked. "It's a present for you. Just to say how sorry I am, with the way I treated you." She couldn't believe his bullshit. "There's a dead body in my garden because of you, Brian, and you're talking about a fresh start. Have you got a screw loose or something?" He seemed angry all of a sudden. "Don't start, you bitch. I've missed you, that's all. All I wanted to do was make it up to you." Verity couldn't take any more, and yelled, "And who the hell is that bloke laying on my floor dead? Do you know him?" "For God's sake, Verity, why take life so seriously? I met him tonight. He was desperate for some drugs. I promised to pay him well if he came with me tonight. All I wanted to do was freak you out for a little while, so you'd realize that being on your own wasn't much fun. Then the copper turned up, spoiling everything. Look, sweetheart, I fucked up." She had a plan and said, "I see what you're saying, Brian. I forgive you." Verity wanted to be sick. She peered at him seductively, hoping he would fall for it. "Close your eyes, and the next thing you will feel are my lips on your lips. Will you do that for me, Brian?" He seemed reluctant. "Why do I need to close my eyes? Is this a trick?" "If you trusted me, you would do what I ask. Relationships are built on trust," she replied. A chill ran through her. Once he'd shut his eyes, Verity picked up the knife from the worktop and stabbed him in the thigh. He fell to the floor, screaming. Verity ran from the room and up the stairs. Her mobile phone was in the bedroom. On the landing, Verity headed down the hall scared as can be. She heard his footsteps coming up the stairs. In her bedroom, Verity saw the mobile on the cabinet beside the bed, hurrying to it. She dialed the number for the police, but her hands shook terribly. By accident, Verity dropped the phone. It fell under the bed. Now on her knees, she tried looking for it, with no success. Then a voice said at the entrance, "You've really pissed me off, sweetheart. I'm afraid there's no going back." Verity looked at him. Please leave me be. You've had your last chance. I will enjoy this, Brian said aggressively. He took a step towards her. A meter from her was an open window. She tried climbing out onto the porch roof. Brian suddenly had hold of her foot. Verity looked back at the face of the devil. Using her other foot, she kicked him hard in the face. Brian fell back into the room, hitting his head on the side of the cabinet. Verity was shocked beyond belief. She looked back into her bedroom and saw Brian staring back. He was crying. I'm so sorry, my beautiful Verity, Brian muttered. I know I've done wrong, and I deserve everything that I'm going through, but if only you would forgive me, it would mean everything. Verity looked at him disgusted. Just rot in hell, you pathetic loser. Anger covered his face. Within a second, he was back on his feet. Verity took a step back from the window and felt the edge of the roof. Brian tried to grab her dressing gown. Then she had an idea. A few feet from her, at the end of the house, was a trellis which she could climb up. His leg was badly injured, and she might just have a chance of getting away from him and climbing to the higher roof. He made his way through the window, saying, I can't believe you, Verity. Well, you'll know about it shortly, when I cause you some pain. Brian searched for her. Where was she? She had climbed 2 meters when she heard the most outrageous scream from below her. She looked down, her heart racing. He stared back with a smile on his face. Found you, he said. Just leave me be, she shouted. Verity carried on making her way up, not too far now. You really think you can escape me, he yelled, running to the bottom of the trellis and trying to grab her foot. Verity did her best to kick his hand away, but with no luck. She felt a firm grip around her ankle and knew she was in serious trouble. She tried to pull herself up. Without warning, she lost her grip and fell awkwardly. Verity faced him, terrified. For a second, he seemed bemused by the whole thing. Then a monstrous look came across his face and he said chillingly, Look what I've done because of you. You will pay with your life, you heartless bitch. Verity felt his hands around her throat. No, please, she begged. He wasn't having any of it. She had trouble breathing. The fear of death consumed her. All of a sudden, a faint sound was heard from the front of the house. What could that be? A flashing blue light was observed some distance away, followed by 2 more. With utter horror, Brian saw 3 police cars coming down the road towards them. But how? Brian said, shocked. He released his hands from her throat and stood up with difficulty. He walked to the edge of the roof, staring at them with an uncomfortable feeling in the pit of his stomach, saying, But I cut the phone line. How could they've known about this? For fuck's sake, this place is in the middle of nowhere. Verity watched him, and with as much strength as she could, she kicked him hard in the back. He vanished from sight, falling to the ground below. She heard him crying in pain. The vehicles stopped a few meters from the house. 5 police officers appeared, and one shouted, Look, she's up there. Verity now knew she was safe. 3 ambulances had turned up within half an hour. Verity sat in one of them as they checked her. The man smiled, then said, You seem okay. Nothing serious to speak of. Thank you, Verity answered. If the truth be told, she felt terrible. Then she saw a policewoman enter the ambulance. Are you okay? The policewoman asked, concern on her face. Not really, she replied. That poor policeman. He tried to help me, you know. The woman wiped a tear from her eye before answering, He was a good friend of mine. I'll miss him a lot. Verity felt like it was all her fault. If only he'd stayed away, he would still be alive. The policewoman rested a hand on Verity's shoulder, then said, Please don't blame yourself. This was out of your control. Verity needed to ask her a question. How did you know I was in trouble? I tried ringing Kevin earlier, several times, but for some strange reason he wasn't answering. Then I grew suspicious that something wasn't right, and knowing he was coming here. Well, the rest is history. Such a shame, Verity answered. Verity peered through the window back towards the house, which had been her home for only a short while. In one window, a light appeared as the early sun reflected off it. A new day was dawning, and with it, a little hope was felt somewhere amidst the darkness. The end.